It all started with a bold declaration from the White House, a move that would send shockwaves across the continent and set the stage for a dramatic confrontation between two of the world's closest allies. In early 2025, President Trump announced a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. The stated goal was to protect American industries and jobs, but the decision reverberated far beyond factory floors and boardrooms. For decades, the US and Canada had enjoyed one of the world's most integrated trading relationships, with goods and services flowing freely across the world's longest undefended border. Now, that relationship was suddenly in jeopardy. But Canada's response was anything but quiet. The announcement was met with disbelief, then outrage, as Canadian leaders scrambled to formulate a response that would match the scale of the threat. Prime Minister Trudeau's government wasted no time. They hit back with a carefully crafted package of retaliatory tariffs targeting key American exports, everything from agricultural products to manufactured goods, designed to inflict maximum political pain in states crucial to the upcoming US election. For once, provincial leaders across Canada set aside their differences and united in common cause. The tariff was seen not just as an economic threat, but as an attack on Canadian sovereignty and dignity. From Ontario's manufacturing heartland to the Pacific Coast's bustling ports, a wave of defiance surged through the country. Truckers, business owners, and ordinary citizens alike rallied together, determined to show that Canada would not be America's punching bag. The proposed tariff threatened to unravel decades of economic integration, putting thousands of jobs at risk on both sides of the border. For many Canadians, it felt like a deep betrayal by a trusted neighbor. The message from Ottawa was clear and resolute. If the United States wanted a fight, Canada was more than ready to stand its ground. Protests erupted in major cities, and the government's approval ratings soared as citizens rallied behind their leaders. The Trump administration, expecting quick compliance or quiet negotiation, was instead stunned by the fierce and unified Canadian response. The White House found itself facing a diplomatic and economic standoff it hadn't anticipated. What was meant to bring Canada to heel instead ignited a firestorm of national pride and economic retaliation. The shockwaves of this confrontation soon reached Alaska, threatening to reshape the future of North American trade and diplomacy. To understand Alaska's panic, just look at a map. Alaska is separated from the lower 48 by Canada. And while most goods arrive by sea, the Alaska Highway through British Columbia and the Yukon is a vital overland lifeline. Fresh produce, medical supplies, and urgent shipments all depend on this route. For many small businesses, the highway is the only affordable way to get supplies in and products out. This dependence is a unique vulnerability, one Canada now threatened to exploit. For decades, American truckers crossed Canada freely, but that stability was now in jeopardy. The idea that this route could be weaponized sent a chill through Alaska. It wasn't just about inconvenience, it was about survival. The state's economy and daily life suddenly hung in the balance, caught in a distant political crossfire. The first major counterstrike in the escalating trade dispute came from British Columbia, a province known for its rugged landscapes and fiercely independent spirit. As tensions mounted between the US and Canada, all eyes turned to the Pacific Northwest, where the next move would set the tone for the entire conflict. Premier David Eby stepped up to the podium and announced a bold new policy. British Columbia would impose steep tolls on US trucks traveling the vital highways to Alaska. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a direct hit at America's logistical lifeline, targeting the only land route connecting Alaska to the rest of the United States. Eby framed the move as a matter of national defense, arguing that Canada had to protect its own interests in the face of mounting pressure. The announcement sent shockwaves through the country, with news outlets and citizens alike debating the wisdom and consequences of such a dramatic step. The Alaska Trucking Association quickly sounded the alarm, warning that these tolls would have a domino effect. Prices for everything, food, fuel, construction materials, and everyday essentials, would skyrocket in Alaska, a state already dependent on long, costly supply chains. For ordinary Alaskans, who already faced some of the highest living costs in North America, the prospect was daunting. Families worried about affording groceries, gas, and heating oil as the threat of new tolls loomed over their daily lives. What made the plan especially clever was its practicality. British Columbia could simply convert existing highway way stations into toll booths, making the policy both easy to implement and difficult to circumvent. It was a move that required little new infrastructure, but promised maximum impact. The threat was not just theoretical, it was entirely credible. By leveraging its geography and infrastructure, Canada demonstrated it was willing to use creative, unconventional tactics in this high-stakes trade war. Alaska's governor, alarmed by the potential fallout, pleaded publicly for cooler heads to prevail and for both sides to de-escalate. But British Columbia's leadership stood firm, refusing to back down in the face of American pressure. The proposed tolls quickly became a powerful bargaining chip, giving Canada new leverage in negotiations and forcing the U.S. to reconsider its own tactics. The once friendly highway, a symbol of cross-border cooperation, was now transformed into a stark reminder of division and uncertainty. Suddenly, Alaska's future and the daily lives of its people were at the mercy of Canadian politics, as the world watched to see who would blink first in this unprecedented standoff. British Columbia's toll threat didn't just ruffle feathers, it sent shockwaves across the entire country, igniting a fierce sense of unity and determination. Canadians from coast to coast, regardless of political stripe or regional differences, rallied together in a rare show of solidarity. The message was unmistakable. Canada would not be pushed around. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford wasted no time, announcing a bold 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. This move directly targeted American states that rely heavily on Canadian power, sending a clear signal that economic leverage would be used as a tool of resistance. In the Yukon, Premier Ranj Pillai took a different approach, banning American spirits from government liquor stores and tightening restrictions on U.S. companies seeking local contracts. The territory, often overlooked in national disputes, now stood firmly on the front lines. Public anger in the Yukon boiled over, with protests erupting in small towns and even calls to ban Donald Trump Jr. from entering the territory. The sense of outrage was palpable, and the community's resolve only grew stronger. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Trudeau's federal government threw its full support behind the provinces, unveiling a sweeping list of retaliatory tariffs. The federal response was swift and decisive, aiming to amplify the impact of provincial measures. For once, the provinces, often seen as junior partners in Confederation, were leading the charge. Their coordinated actions showed that when united, they could wield significant power and inflict real economic pain on the United States. The dispute quickly escalated beyond simple tariffs, morphing into a tangled web of sanctions, boycotts, and countermeasures. Trade routes that once hummed with activity now faced uncertainty and disruption. The once friendly border, long a symbol of cooperation and trust, bristled with new economic defenses. Security was tightened, and the atmosphere grew tense as both sides dug in. The message from Canada was unmistakable. Economic pain would not be one-sided. Every action would be met with a measured, strategic response. The deep integration that once brought prosperity to both nations had now become a weapon, wielded in a high-stakes game of brinkmanship. The northern border, once a quiet and unassuming line on the map, had transformed into a front line in a new kind of economic war, one where every province, every community, and every Canadian stood united in defense of their nation's interests. In Alaska, the crisis became real. The threat of tolls on the highway meant the price of essentials, milk, could skyrocket. The threat of tolls on the highway meant the price of essentials, vegetables, could skyrocket. The threat of tolls on the highway meant the price of essentials, fuel, could skyrocket. Grocery stores warned of empty shelves or unaffordable prices. Alaskans, known for resilience, now faced the prospect of being cut off from the rest of the country. The business community sounded the alarm. Delays, shortages, and bankruptcies loomed. The state's economic engine sputtered at the mere threat of disruption. Alaskans felt like collateral damage in a distant political fight. The Great Alaskan Squeeze was on, and the pressure was mounting. As if politics weren't enough, nature intervened. In June 2025, a massive wildfire in northern British Columbia forced the closure of a key stretch of the Alaska Highway. The closure, though unrelated to the trade war, made the threat of isolation real. Trucks carrying perishable goods were stranded, and the flow of supplies stopped. The incident was a sobering preview of what a politically motivated shutdown could do. The highway eventually reopened, but the psychological scar remained. Alaskans saw just how fragile their connection was. The wildfire blurred the line between natural disaster and man-made crisis, deepening the sense of vulnerability. Canadian retaliation soon targeted energy. Officials hinted at restricting electricity exports to the U.S., a potent threat for states like New York and New England, which rely on Canadian power. Even the suggestion sent energy prices climbing and markets into a panic. The U.S. also depends on Canada for most of its imported oil and natural gas. Shutting off pipelines was unlikely, but the threat alone rattled Washington and Wall Street. The energy relationship, once seamless, was now a weapon. The stakes had grown. This was no longer just about Alaska. The entire American economy was now at risk from a deepening conflict with its biggest energy partner. Alaskans, caught in the middle, pleaded for sanity. Governor Dunleavy and the state's congressional delegation urged both Washington and Ottawa to find a solution. They argued Alaska was being unfairly punished for a dispute it didn't start. The crisis exposed fractures within the U.S., as Alaskan leaders lobbied their own president to reverse course. For ordinary Alaskans, the border with Canada was personal. Family, shopping, and friendship crossed it daily. The idea of a hostile border was heartbreaking. Many felt betrayed by both governments. Their plea was a reminder. Behind the politics were real people at risk. Alaska's call for calm was a voice of reason in a storm of rhetoric. As of June 9, 2025, the dispute remains unresolved. If Trump doubles down and Canada retaliates fully, Alaska faces supply chain chaos and economic crisis. The U.S.-Canada relationship, once a model of friendship, is at risk of unraveling. A prolonged conflict could breed resentment and distrust for decades. There is still a path to peace, diplomacy, compromise, and leadership. Trump could exempt Canada from tariffs. Canada could pause its countermeasures. For Alaska, the stakes are existential. The crisis is a warning about the dangers of protectionism and neglecting alliances. The world watches as the ice beneath this crucial relationship grows thinner. Will leaders pull back from the brink, or will the rift deepen beyond repair?